Which of the following is more dangerous to your way of life? An ultra-liberal Democrat, an ultra-conservative Republican, or a homosexual? I'm Dan Ringer, and we'll talk about fairness right now on The Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
Why do we treat people differently based upon who they like or love? My guest is Bradley Milam, Executive Director of Fairness West Virginia. Bradley, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What's Fairness West Virginia?
Fairness West Virginia is the statewide civil rights advocacy organization that's dedicated to promoting fair treatment and civil rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender West Virginians.
I thought we already did that. Don't we have anti-discrimination laws?
We don't at the moment, and not laws that are inclusive of sexual orientation, at least.
So we have laws that will protect people from being discriminated against because of their race or because of their religion.
That's right.
But not because of sexual preference. Is there an election held that says this is the preference of people regarding sex or sexual orientation, whether you're up or down? I mean, I get uncomfortable talking about these terms. Explain to me what we're really talking about here.
Sure. Sexual orientation or sexual identity is an identity that is fairly, modern, is the result of much development in the late 19th and 20th centuries. It is a classification of people based on who they love, who they are attracted to. Some people are straight or heterosexual, and some are gay or homosexual. And those that are homosexual or gay, that class of American citizens, can be discriminated against because of their sexual orientation and their minority status. And that is not protected currently under law.
So I can hire you or not, or fire you or not, simply because of the people that you choose to spend your time with?
That's correct. And you could also deny me housing, for example, for the same reasons.
And Fairness West Virginia is doing what about that?
So we have a couple of legislative priorities, and one of them would be the passage of an ENDA, an Employment and Housing Non-Discrimination Act, that is inclusive of sexual orientation, so that West Virginians here who are gay or lesbian can enjoy the same protections that other West Virginians already enjoy.
How is that compared to what's going on nationally?
Sure. There are quite a few states now that already have sexual orientation inclusive non-discrimination policies. There are over 20 states at the moment that do. That protect from discrimination in terms of state employment, but also in terms of private employment. And there is a greater number of states that only include state employment. Statewide here in West Virginia, Charleston, for example, has its own citywide policy that includes sexual orientation. But as a state, West Virginia does not.
And we don't have such laws nationally either, that is at the national level.
That's right.
Why not?
Well, there have been a couple of legislative priorities that have passed recently, and one would be the hate crimes legislation that would include sexual orientation, which was signed into law last year, and the other would be the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which was also signed into law last year. There has been a federal ENDA, but it has never been voted on, or rather, it has never passed.
It passes in the Senate.
Well, in West Virginia, it's passed the Senate twice.
Senate.
Right. But it has never been voted on in the House of Delegates.
And it's not making headway nationally?
At the moment, no.
Bradley, people don't like people like you. Why?
Well, we should first note that polls are changing rapidly, and that acceptance of gay people is higher now than it ever has been. And in fact, a vast majority of Americans think that gay people should not be discriminated against in terms of employment and housing. But there is a history, a short but intense one, of institutionalized discrimination against gays and lesbians. And that discrimination is not necessarily the product of the entire history of Western civilization, but rather is the product of very intense discrimination of the 20th century.
Most people would not think that that's accurate.
Sure.
And we hear it said from time to time that there are biblical prohibitions against homosexual behavior, that from the dawn of time and for millennia, this kind of behavior has been frowned upon and ostracized and prohibited. That's not exactly true, is it?
Well, sodomy, its definition has changed over time and quite radically. And with the formation of sexual identities, of this binary of homosexuality and heterosexuality that has taken place in the late 19th and throughout the 20th centuries, sodomy in itself had become redefined in the 20th century. Before it never did classify or target one particular class of people based on their sexual identity. It was never an exclusively homosexual definition.
Sodomy, in its conventional, or at least its current definition, is usually described as anal intercourse of some sort. Mm-hmm. And that's usually male-male, male-female, mm-hmm. male-animal. Mm-hmm. But that's not always what the definition has been.
That's right. In Puritan times, in the American colonies, it could even include certain sexual positions, even among married men and women. That would account as sodomy as well. And throughout the 19th century, it basically was defined as any non-procreative sexual act. And a non-procreative sexual act could even include sexual acts between men and women who are married. And almost no sodomy laws, they varied by state. Almost none of them included sexual acts between women. And so it never targeted what we understand today as homosexuality, and that would be sexual activity between two people of the same sex.
From the times you mentioned, it seems to date back to about the settling of North America.
Yes, in terms of my understanding of American history, yes.
I did a little reading on this, and one of the things I saw suggested in the books that I looked at was that I'm going to call it the Puritan
Sure.
motive, I don't know if it was to increase the population in the New World, that if you were going to have sex, you needed to have it for the purpose of creating more people to populate the village, the province, the territory, whatever it was, and to farm the farm. And that if you did anything differently from that, you were going to be singled out, punished in some cases, chastised, because you weren't increasing the size of the herd, in essence. Is that where it started? Where our preoccupation with things like that started?
I think that's accurate. And homosexuality, as we know it today, was, the term homosexuality, for example, was coined in 1868 by German medicologists. And so
1868?
That's right. And it was published in a journal in 1869 in Germany, and then it made its way over to North America. But the term itself is very recent, and it's the product of medical discourse in order to describe what medical professionals at the time called a third sex, or a sex invert, and those were a mannish woman, quote unquote, or an effeminate man, and those are largely seen as the sort of foundation upon which we currently understand homosexual and heterosexual identity.
Why do we care? I mean, you feel the way you feel, I feel the way I feel, you feel the way you feel. Why is it any of my business how you feel, or Bradley, how you feel?
Well, I would agree with you, but many don't. And there's been quite a bit of discrimination against gay men and lesbians in the 20th century, and many stereotypes have been tossed around. And a few of those, for example, are that gay people are child molesters, that that they're out to molest children, that they should not be school teachers, they should not be around children, they should not adopt children. And those stereotypes are often tied in with stereotypes of other classes of people, such as stereotypes of Jewish people in America were often seen as being child molesters. It's also been seen as some sort of secret order by which homosexuals who are living in the United States are part of a transnational or extranational, very urban, cosmopolitan, secret order that is essentially un-American. And that's what many people described to describe the Catholic population, the Jewish population.
We're talking about fairness toward people of different sexual orientations and gender identifications. My guest is Bradley Milam, Executive Director of Fairness West Virginia. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. Do people think you're out to recruit people? Is it?
Well, that is a prevailing stereotype, and it has been for quite a while. And it basically arose in between the 1930s and 1950s. And by many campaigns. And in fact, in the 1950s, the State Department adopted a policy in which it ratted out and fired all known or suspected homosexuals in the State Department. And in fact, a little-known fact is that there were more homosexuals than communists who were fired in the 1950s largely because of McCarthyism.
The problem with identifying someone who identifies themselves as being homosexual is you don't wear badges.
Right.
Sometimes you can tell from behaviors, the way a person talks, sometimes. But I know people who are gay or lesbian, but who have simply not bothered to tell me, so I'm unaware of it.
The sexual identity, of course, is very similar legally to racial identity or other kinds of identity, but the ways in which they are lived can be more different. And, you know, there are stereotypes that people play on in which they categorize someone as being definitely gay and someone as being definitely not gay, and sometimes those stereotypes in those categories aren't that true. And so, you know, while the stereotype of the gay man as being very effeminate or the lesbian as being very, very masculinized, those stereotypes still exist, but do not describe the entire sort of spectrum of gay men and lesbians.
That's an interesting concept. You use the word spectrum. And there is a spectrum in the way people perceive themselves, in the way people are, the way people act, the way people think. You know, for every ultra-conservative Republican, there's an ultra-conservative liberal, and for each one of them, there are probably a whole bunch of moderates in the middle. And the same applies to sexual orientation. That's
right. And in terms of, you know, politics, there definitely are Republicans who are openly gay. And it's often seen that gay people are only Democrats, they're only ultra-liberal. That is not the case.
Well, no, when we read the news reports about what goes on in Congress, we find out that people are different. And there is no tie between sexual identity and what you want to do for a living necessarily, or what party you're in, or what you do on weekends.
That's right. There may be a certain political party that is more accepting than another. There may be a certain occupation that is more accepting than another, but I think you could find gay people in almost any occupation.
Well, when did you decide to be gay?
Well, that's an interesting question. I knew that I was gay when around the time I entered puberty, and I knew throughout high school that I was. It was not a choice. And I decided to come out when I was 18. And
it's not something you catch, or it's not something you decide to try out?
No, it's not. It's not something that I caught, at least. And if you look at medical stances, the stances of all mainstream medical organizations in the U.S., you'll find the same answer. The American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics all agree that sexual orientation is not a choice, whether someone is homosexual or heterosexual.
When did you first suspect that you were not the classic heterosexual being?
I guess it was around the time of puberty, and all of my friends, you know, had their own excitements, and I understood that I looked at girls differently from what they did. And I also understood that given the context, given the place where I grew up and the school that I was in, that I shouldn't share that with anyone.
How did you know that?
That I shouldn't share it.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Baptist faith, and while many mainline Christian denominations today are openly ordaining gay and lesbian clergy, and in fact yesterday the Presbyterian Church voted to do so, the Baptist Church, at least the one that I grew up in, did not approve of homosexuality, and so I knew, I had been taught that homosexuals were destined to end up in hell. And knowing that, I also knew that as someone whose sexual orientation was natural to them, that I should not tell people about it because it could cause me a lot of damage.
You used the word natural. There is a lot of discussion about whether homosexuality is a natural condition or an unnatural condition. But there are examples of homosexual behavior across the animal kingdom.
That's right. Over 1,500 species, I believe, is what I heard a biologist saying yesterday, in fact. And so the idea of it being unnatural can be countered by the fact that it's found in so many different species.
You're 11 or 12 years old, which I assume it's about the age you were when you started to suspect that you were different somehow. And people are telling you you're going to burn in hell forever for that. How did you feel?
Not too great. And, you know, in addition to that, when people tell you that you're destined for hell, and that's the only kind of lesson you're getting from everyone, from relatives, from neighbors, from your pastor, you internalize that, and you don't tell anyone about it. And so you live knowing that because of who you are and because of what you feel, that you have no choice but will be destined to go to hell.
You have to have a lot of questions about, along the lines of why me or how did this happen?
Of course.
How do you resolve those questions? Or do you?
It took a long time, and high school was not the best of places for me. I was bullied, like probably most all gay and lesbian students who grew up in West Virginia. But I came to it once I turned 18, or I was around 17 or 18, and I started to take it upon myself to go outside of that realm of my community and read things from, you know, medical associations, for example, and talk to other people I knew who were gay, who lived in other towns in West Virginia.
You became your own counselor, I guess.
I guess so, and for many kids, I've heard, and for many of my friends who are my age, that they encountered a similar situation.
We're talking about fairness toward people of different sexual orientations and gender identifications. My guest is Bradley Milam. He's the newly employed Executive Director of Fairness West Virginia. I'm Dan Ringer, and this is The Law Works. I was surprised when I started to talk with my friends about this show topic. Many of them had the same story to relate, and it was a story that I recognized because I had seen it too. I had a friend in high school who was different. Now, this was back a few years. It was in the mid-'60s. I didn't know how he was different because people didn't talk about that sort of thing in public, but he was different. Somebody eventually told me that he was gay, and that was whispered. Mm-hmm. And it didn't mean anything to me particularly. I didn't care. But I noticed that he did a lot. We graduated from high school, went out into the world, and some years later, I was doing an internship at a community mental health center. And I saw him there, and he was seeking services. And I talked with him for a while, and I realized that he was there to try to get straightened out, that somebody was going to try to help fix him. And within just a couple of years, he had taken his own life. And that's a very common thing. Did you go through the I need to get fixed phase, or were you able to bypass that?
I thought very seriously that I should when I was around 12 or 13. And I had heard of other kids when I was in high school who had left for a few weeks or whatever to to be fixed, quote unquote. I didn't do it because I didn't tell anyone that I was gay, and part of the reason why I didn't tell anyone was because I was terrified of going to a place like that. So I didn't have that experience, but many certainly do, and that is often, it never really fixes, is a funny word, but it never, resolves that orientation, but actually creates many other problems. And so suicide, for example, is pretty common among people who go to ex-gay camps, or even just among the gay and lesbian population in general. In fact, teens are, something like 6 or 7 times more likely to commit suicide if they are gay.
Teens invariably, regardless of how they feel about themselves sexually, feel different and feel like outsiders. Very rarely do you find somebody who's at peace with themselves. So you heap this on top of it, or it gets heaped on top of you. It's got to be really difficult.
Yes, it is.
You were a victim of bullying because of all this.
I was.
Was there any help for you?
There could have been, I think, though I'm not sure if it would have been in my school. I think I could have talked to a few of my relatives. I didn't, because I was terrified of telling them that I was bullied, because they would want to know the reason why, and I would have to tell them that people thought I was gay, and I didn't want them to know. I think that a few students in certain high schools in West Virginia certainly have much better resources now. There are a couple of high schools in Charleston, for example, that I know have much stronger resources than do the vast majority of high schools in West Virginia. But I think that by and large, there are many high schools that have little to no help for teens who are victims of bullying because they are gay. And often one reason why is because those teens think that there's no one there who would help them. No one talks about it.
To this day, no one talks about it.
In many high schools, it's a very contentious issue. And so when no one talks about it, teens are thinking, well, I guess I shouldn't talk about it. I guess I can't. I guess I don't have anyone to talk to about it. And so they don't.
How do you feel when you get up in the morning and you look at the newspaper and you see there has been what we classify now as hate crimes? Someone who is gay has been assaulted, and usually it's not just slapped around a little bit. It's a hideous, brutal assault, maybe leading even to a violent death. What do you think about when you see that?
Words can hardly describe what kind of feeling that induces for me, or probably for just about any gay or lesbian. It's terrible. But it also inspires me to further the work that I'm doing. Of course, I'm putting myself in a more dangerous position by being, the public face of the statewide LGBT rights organization here in West Virginia. But somebody has to do that work so that these kinds of crimes can be reduced.
There came a time when you graduated from high school, when you went off to college. Where'd you go?
Went to Yale University.
How were you accepted there?
I studied a lot when I was in high school. I loved school, and worked a lot, and graduated top of my class, and applied to Yale completely on a whim. I'd never even visited the university. And
it's a good school, I hear.
It's fair. It's decent. A solid education. And I was accepted. And I toured. I fell in love with the place, and I went.
Was it a comfortable environment for you?
It was, in many different ways. It was very comfortable, and many people have this image of the Ivy League as being very stodgy, and in some ways it can be, but by and large, friends are friends, and it was a very warm, welcome environment. It felt like home.
You came back to West Virginia.
I did.
How are you in Fairness, West Virginia, being accepted, or are you?
Mm-hmm. I spent most of my time in Charleston at this point. I started April 1st, so I'm pretty new to the job. And in Charleston, at least, there's a wide net of support, as there is here in Morgantown. I've been very well received by many people there and here. friends that I had no idea would accept me have and appreciate what I'm doing, are proud of me for doing it, and relatives and so forth. So,
if someone wanted to get in contact with Fairness West Virginia, where would they go? How would they do it?
Primarily because it's such a rural state, and for some people it's hard to get to Charleston. They could do it online. So on our website, www.fairnesswv.org.
Fairnesswv.org. Fairnesswv is all one word.
That's right. Our Facebook page, things of that sort.
As a famous newscaster used to say, Bradley, courage.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the Law Works, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. If you have a legal problem and want to know if you need a lawyer, you can discuss your problem with a lawyer by calling 1-800-642-3617 Tuesday evenings from 6 to 8 p.m. That's 1-800-642-3617. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks program topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find a video of the program at the LawWorks website. You'll also find free video and podcasts of previous programs on YouTube and iTunes. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future program, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a free copy of this show for classroom use, send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The Law Works is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.